Hi guys, so I'm here today to do my August reading wrap up. These are reviews of all the books I read in the second half of August because if you haven't already seen, I did a mid-month wrap up in August, which I don't usually do because I don't usually read enough books to do 2 wrap ups. But I've been reading tons this month. I read 7 books in the first half of the month, so I reviewed 7 books in that video, and I have continued with that momentum. I have read quite a few more books in the month of August, so I'm going to give you mini reviews of the rest of the books I read. But if you haven't seen my other wrap up, I will link it down below and above, all of the different places. But without further ado, let's get into the books, shall we? First up is The Doll's Alphabet by Camilla Grudova. This is a collection of short stories published by Fitzcarraldo Editions, and these are some stunning book covers. I really enjoyed this collection of short stories though. I've never read the author before and I've never actually read anything by this publishing house before, but I'm so pleased with this collection that I'll definitely be picking up more. And this is a sort of surreal, dark, magic realism short story collection. Some of them feel as if they're set in dystopian versions of our society, others could be set now or in the past. They're a little bit timeless, if that makes sense, and there's loads of reoccurring themes throughout them. Things like sewing machines and mermaids, lots of different things, but although each story is distinct, you will notice little mentions and references to things that are very similarly referenced in the other stories, which I think is quite nice and brings them all together, and I think they were all beautifully written. Some of my favourites probably were, I really enjoyed the first one, Unstitching. I think it was a good start to the collection. I really enjoyed number 3, The Gothic Society, Rhinoceros, and the penultimate one, The Moth Emporium. Waxy, in fact, I think was one of my favourites, but just overall I really enjoyed this collection. There was lots of little images that really stuck with me and lit up my imagination, so really well done. I then read The Roanoke Girls by Amy Engel. This is kind of a thriller. It's a mystery novel. There's not a lot of jumpy moments, but there's lots of mysteries and horrible things going on, and so I guess it kind of fits into the thriller genre. This one follows Lane Roanoke, who after her mother commits suicide is sent to live with her grandparents and her cousin, whom she's never met, at Roanoke, and her mother had really horrible memories of growing up but never explained to Lane what they were, so she was really excited to go to this beautiful big house, live with these rich people in the sort of rural United States, and then she spends one summer there, leaves, we don't know exactly why she leaves at first, and is now drawn back there many years later because her cousin Allegra has gone missing and her grandfather has phoned her to ask her to come and help look for Allegra. So she does, and this is her first time returning to Roanoke after whatever happened that summer, and it's about finding out what happened that summer and also what's happened to Allegra. You find out what was going on at Roanoke quite soon into it. It's not saved for the end of the book like the Allegra mystery, and it's very disturbing. The book itself really gets under your skin, and some of like the mysteries, like I said, are very disturbing and quite disgusting and horrible, and I don't know how else to explain them, but something about the story really hooks you in and you really want to know how things are going to work out. There's enough to keep you reading, and I really like that flash back and forward between the then and the now, learning about that summer in tandem with experiencing her back at Roanoke now. I like that structure, and although I don't think it's the best book I ever read, I did fly through it and it certainly had my attention the whole time. I think I read it in about 2 days. I couldn't really put it down, in fact. If it sounds like your cup of tea, then it might be worth checking out. On audiobook, I listened to the 13th and final instalment of the Sookie Stackhouse Mysteries series. You'll know from my other wrap up that I was finishing up the series, having read the first 10 a couple of years ago, and now just having read those final 3. I enjoyed number 13. The series doesn't hold the same momentum throughout. They're definitely better at the beginning, but it was a nice tying of things up, and it was very much a tying things up book. Almost every character, I feel, that had any important role from the rest of the books reappears in this book, at least briefly, just so we know exactly how their life has turned out and is going to turn out. It's quite funny and very like, I'm going to squish all these people into that book and just get everything really neatly tied up. But I didn't really mind. I think after 13 books you grow to really care about some characters and you just kind of want that neat wrapping up of everything, so I was quite happy. These books aren't phenomenally written, but they do hook you in. I think the characters are really good fun and quite lovable and quirky, and you do grow to care about them, particularly Sookie. So I think the series overall is definitely worth giving a shot. It's set in Louisiana. It follows Sookie Stackhouse, who is seemingly a mortal woman but is also telepathic. And recently vampires have announced to the world that they are in fact real and are trying to integrate themselves with human society because due to the invention of synthetic blood, which means they don't have to drink human blood. Some of them still do, but they don't have to. And it's this weaving of the real world and the paranormal world. There's also lots of mysteries in it, which is why it's called the Sookie Stackhouse Mystery Series. So you're constantly wondering who committed this crime or who's behind this, which is quite good. And there's also a lot of romantic interest going on there, some of which I liked, some of which I didn't. I then read a number of books in the Wicca or Sweep series. In fact, I read the first 8. This is a young adult paranormal fantasy series I read when I was a teenager, and I recently decided to start rereading them, and once I did, I could not stop. Each one is under 200 pages. They're quite simplistically written, although I like the way they're written, and you just fly through them. You know, I was reading them in a day or 2 in a day because they were just so quick to read, and I did also have a fortnight off work, so that's one of the reasons I was able to consume so many in a day. But I read the first 8, I flew through them. I was a little bit apprehensive of how much I was going to enjoy them, having adored them as a teenager, and didn't want to ruin that for myself as an adult. But honestly, I was probably just in the right mood for them, and I enjoyed them almost as much as I did the first time around. Obviously I know a lot of the plot now, but I'd forgotten a lot of details, some minor plot points, and it was really nice rediscovering those, and even the bits I did remember were just as pleasant to read. It follows Morgan, who is a teenager in an American high school, when this young boy Cal comes to their high school and introduces her and her friends to Wicca, as he and his mother are practicing witches. They worship the religion of witchcraft and Wicca, and Morgan finds herself with a real affinity to Wicca, and Wicca has an affinity for her. I feel like I've summarised this book a few times recently, but that's it, and I don't want to spoil the series for you, so I'm just talking about them more generally. There are 15 books in the series, and I do want to continue on and finish rereading them all and finally getting to the 15th one, which I've never actually read. So that will be really nice, and I'm so pleased that I'm enjoying this as much as the last time. There are no great feats of literature, but I think the combination of themes of real teenage life and magic are really well done, and there's a nice balance there. I think the characters are really interesting and likeable, and there's just something quite magical about reading them, so I'm quite happy to be back in this world. I reread another book this month, and that is the Symposium by Plato. This is the Penguin Great Ideas edition. This is a piece of ancient Greek philosophy, which I did read years back, and my memory of it was so foggy. I could only remember a few little bits of it that I really wanted to get around to rereading it, and it's so short. I picked up this edition and it pushed me to get that reread on the go. This is specifically on the topic of love, or eros, and it's structured as a dialogue, as Plato's works usually are, in which a group of men are at a symposium together and having conversations and decide to converse on the topic of love. And each man at the dinner party then gives a speech on what he thinks love is, who he thinks the god Eros is, who Aphrodite is, how love functions in Greek society, and each one has a different theory about where love came from and what love means. And you get only a few of the people at the dinner party, but these are supposedly the best speeches of the dinner party, and it's really interesting. It doesn't necessarily represent what everybody in ancient Greece thought, as these are varying theories, but it does give you an idea of perhaps some of the things that people were saying at the time. It also gives you a little bit of an intro into Greek culture, this culture of discussing philosophy at the Symposium, some of the gods like Eros and Aphrodite, but it's, like I said, a philosophical musing, so it's not fact, but it's really fascinating and it's probably my favourite of Plato's works. But I did read one non-fiction this month, if you don't count philosophy as non-fiction, and that is The Descent of Man by Grayson Perry. Grayson Perry is a famous British artist, and The Descent of Man, with a title inspired by Charles Darwin, is on the topic of masculinity and the problem of the current, you know, manifestation of masculinity, and how it damages society and how it hurts women, but in particular how it actually damages men, and how the institutional masculinity and the promotion of masculinity is really damaging for men. And it's something we can see through stats like the suicide rates amongst men, the way that society tells men that they don't have as complex feelings, and that they shouldn't share their feelings, and they aren't really nurtured to have the same kind of sharing supportive relationships necessarily that women are, and then that's where obviously you result in things like suicide and depression and not talking about things and late diagnoses. That's one of the little things that's touched on in here. It's just an overall exploration of masculinity, and like I said, how it is bad for everybody in society. And this is a book that supports feminism, because feminism wants gender equality, and gender equality is good for men and women. And I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was so fascinating. It was so good to see a book discussing this topic, a really accessible short book with Grayson Perry's own anecdotes thrown in there that I think makes it a really easy read. Not that it's dumbed down or anything, but I think that helps you get into it. I will say I think it could have been longer. I think it was maybe a little bit too short, and the structure made it all just feel like it was a bit jam-packed and rushed through. Like, I think Grayson Perry could have said more on the topic, but I don't think that makes it a bad book. I still think it's a fantastic book and a really good book to see, and one I'd love to see more people read. I think it could have a really positive impact. I think Grayson Perry has also done some TV documentaries on the same topic, which he mentions in the book, so I'm going to look up those and see if I can watch them. But I really enjoyed this and I would recommend it. But after reading the Wicca or Sweep series, I was on such a witchcraft kick and really wanted to read some more witchy books. So I picked up The Graces by Laura Eve. This book is set in a high school in the UK where a new girl, River, attends, and it's been a few months since she started at this school and she hasn't really made any friends yet, but everybody in the school is fascinated and obsessed by the Graces, 3 siblings who are very popular and cool but keep themselves to themselves really, and are supposedly witches. River, however, manages to kind of ingratiate herself with one of the Graces and become a part of their group, and it's about her experience there. I really enjoyed this. I think it was a really nice level of dark. I think it was quite unnerving and dark at moments, and there was lots of little surprises and shocks in there that you weren't expecting, which I think were really good. I liked how it constantly kept you guessing whether magic was real or wasn't real. I think my one complaint would be that I think a lot of the dialogue felt quite stilted. It didn't feel very natural. Not all of it, but quite a lot of it. I think particularly the dialogue between River and Finn, but it didn't really take away from my reading experience. I still really enjoyed this book, and I think if you like witchcrafty books, this is worth checking out. If you like the film The Craft, definitely worth checking out. It also reminded me a little bit of The Virgin Suicides and a tiny bit of The Secret History by Donna Tartt. It also turned out to be the first in a series, which I didn't realise, and ended on a note that has me very intrigued for the sequel. A book that didn't impress me quite as much was Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. This is quite a short book, it's only about 160 something pages, and this one is a book with a brilliant premise, like an absolutely brilliant premise. It's about a group of teenagers at a boarding school for specifically children who stumbled into fairy realms at some point in their childhood. So like Alice from Alice in Wonderland, or the children from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, they've come back from their magic other worlds and are finding it incredibly difficult to adjust to the world that they left behind. So they've all been sent to this boarding school to help them. And I think that premise is brilliant, I think it's really imaginative, and I think the plot's quite imaginative and I quite liked it. It turns into a bit of a murder mystery about 1/3 of the way through. But I think it was all too rushed. It was too short, it was too jam-packed, there was very little development, there was very little exploration of the magical world, which I think lots of people would want from this kind of book, and it was just too jumbled, and I just don't think it was that great, unfortunately. But after finishing the Sookie Stackhouse mysteries, I was in the mood to try something else by Charlaine Harris. So I downloaded on audiobook the first in the Aurora Teagarden series, which is Real Murders. Now these aren't paranormal. These follow Aurora Teagarden, who is part of a group called Real Murders, where they all get together every month and give lectures on either cold cases or old famous crimes and just discuss them. Sometimes they watch films or have special guests. I think we can all slightly sympathise with that fascination with like true crime podcasts and TV shows and books that are going on at the moment. Something a lot of us get fascinated by, so they have a little group that does that. However, the murders get too real when one of their group is in fact murdered. So it's a crime mystery, murder mystery book with Aurora Teagarden, the librarian, at the centre. Obviously trying to figure out what's happening, and the police bumbling along, and her meeting young men with a bit of romance. It's got a lot of the elements that Sookie Stackhouse does as well, a bit of a mystery, some romances, all of that kind of thing. I don't think it's as good as the Sookie Stackhouse mystery series, but I do think it was good fun. I enjoyed listening to the audiobook, and I'll probably check out the next one in the series at some point. I also had my inclinations of who the murderer was quite early on, and I was right. So although it still kept me guessing and I wasn't certain, it was possible to figure it out. But that is everything I read in the second half of August. No mean amount, like I said, I've been reading tons at the moment and really enjoying it. Hopefully you've managed to check out my other reading wrap up, but if you have any thoughts on the books I mentioned in this video, please do leave any comments down below, or if you have any book recommendations for me based on what I've been reading recently, I'd love to hear them, especially any witchy or fairy or thriller books. But until next time guys, happy reading and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!